Resourcefulness begins when you stop asking, what do I wish I had, and start asking, what can I do with what I have right now? That is a completely different way of thinking. One mindset focuses on limitations, the other focuses on possibilities. Imagine two people facing the exact same problem. One looks at the situation and immediately starts listing everything they don't have. They don't have enough money. They don't know the right person. They don't have enough experience. They don't have the right equipment. They don't have enough time. The second person looks at the same situation and asks one question: what's my next move? The circumstances are identical, but their mental worlds are completely different. The second person has something far more valuable than perfect resources. They have the willingness to figure things out. And that ability can change everything. You don't always need more resources. Sometimes you need to become better at using the resources already available to you. If you have a phone, you have access to information. If you have a skill, you have something you can improve and potentially exchange for value. If you have an hour, you have an hour that can either disappear or become an investment in yourself. If you don't know how to do something, you can learn. If you don't know someone, you can start building relationships. If the first door is closed, you can search for another door. This is how resourceful people think. They don't treat limitations as automatic stop signs. They treat them as challenges that demand creativity. When their original plan fails, they don't sit there staring at the failure and waiting for somebody to rescue them. They adjust. They search. They experiment, they learn, they make another attempt from a different angle. They understand that life is not a machine where you insert a perfect plan and receive a perfect result. Reality changes constantly, and the person who can adapt to reality has a tremendous advantage. Think about how often people say, I would do it if I had the money. But money is not always the first resource you need. Sometimes you need knowledge. Sometimes you need patience. Sometimes you need a better strategy. Sometimes you need to start smaller. Sometimes you need to provide value before expecting a reward. The person who only knows how to operate when they have abundant resources becomes helpless when resources become limited. But the person who learns how to operate with very little develops a skill that stays with them regardless of circumstances. This is why difficult beginnings can be valuable. When you don't have everything, you are forced to think. You are forced to become creative. You are forced to solve problems instead of simply paying someone else to solve them. You begin noticing opportunities that you would have ignored when everything was available to you. You learn how to negotiate. You learn how to communicate. You learn how to research. You learn how to make decisions. You learn how to recover from mistakes. You begin developing the internal confidence that comes from knowing you can figure things out, and that kind of confidence is completely different from pretending to be confident. You don't need to stand in front of a mirror and tell yourself you're unstoppable. You build confidence by collecting evidence. You solve one problem, and you remember that you solved it. You face one uncomfortable situation and you discover that you survived it. You start with limited resources and you make progress anyway. Then the next time something difficult appears, your brain is evidence that you can handle it. That's why you should stop obsessing over whether you're ready. Readiness is often created through action. You become ready by doing the thing, making mistakes, learning from them, and becoming better. The first version won't be perfect. The first attempt may be embarrassing. The first plan may fail. That's normal. You are not supposed to know everything before you begin. You're supposed to begin, gather information, and improve. Consider someone who wants to become physically stronger but doesn't have access to an expensive gym. They can either use that as an excuse or find another method. Someone wants to learn a language but can't afford expensive classes. They can either wait or use the countless educational resources available to them. Someone wants to build a career but doesn't have connections. They can complain about networking or start creating genuine value and gradually build relationships. The point isn't that every problem is easy. The point is that the resourceful mind refuses to assume that difficulty automatically means impossibility. You need to train yourself to look for the next available move, not the perfect move. Not the easiest move, the next move. Because action creates information. When you act, you discover what works and what doesn't. When you remain frozen, you learn nothing. You can spend 6 months planning, worrying, researching, and imagining every possible problem. Or you can take a small step and let reality teach you something. And this is where resilience connects directly with resourcefulness. When you become comfortable using what you have, you become less fragile. You no longer need circumstances to cooperate before you can function. You learn how to keep moving when things are inconvenient. You learn how to stay productive when motivation disappears. You learn how to solve problems when the obvious solution isn't available. You learn how to adapt when the plan changes. The world will constantly give you reasons to wait. There will always be another obstacle, another bill, another rejection, another person who says no, another unexpected problem, another reason why today isn't the right day. But if you make waiting your default response, you will eventually become addicted to preparation without execution. So start changing the question you ask yourself. When you encounter a problem, don't immediately ask, why don't I have what I need? Ask, what do I have and how can I use it? When you don't know something, ask, where can I learn it? When someone says no, ask, what other options exist? When your plan collapses, ask, what can I change when you feel unprepared? Ask, what is one thing I can do today that will make me more prepared tomorrow? That mindset transforms obstacles into exercises. Every limitation becomes an opportunity to practice creativity. Every setback becomes an opportunity to practice adaptation. Every uncomfortable situation becomes an opportunity to prove that you can continue without perfect conditions. You stop demanding that life become easier before you become stronger, and you start using difficult circumstances as training for the person you are trying to become. Most people don't realize how much their emotional state controls their decisions. Something happens, they immediately react, and only afterward do they think about what they did. They receive an angry message and respond immediately. They experience rejection and make a decision based on hurt. They lose money and panic. They face criticism and become defensive. They encounter a setback and instantly assume the worst. The original problem might have been manageable, but their emotional reaction turns it into something much bigger. This is why emotional control is not weakness. It is a form of power. Staying calm doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about the outcome to avoid allowing a temporary emotional reaction to control a permanent decision. Imagine you're driving toward an important destination and suddenly the road is blocked. A reactive person might sit there getting angry at the road, blaming the traffic, shouting at other drivers, and complaining about how unfair the situation is. But none of that removes the obstacle. A resourceful person looks at the map and searches for another route. That is exactly how you should approach difficult moments in life. When something goes wrong, your first responsibility is not to complain about reality. Your first responsibility is to understand reality. Once you understand what has actually happened, you can decide what to do next. This requires a pause, a long pause, sometimes just a few seconds. Something happens, and instead of immediately responding, you create a small gap between the event and your reaction. You breathe, you observe, you ask yourself, what is actually happening? Is this truly a disaster? Or does it simply feel like one because you're emotional? What part of this situation can you control? What part can you not control? What information are you missing? What action would make the situation better rather than worse? Those questions can completely change your response because they move your brain away from panic and toward problem solving. Think about how many bad decisions are made because someone wants immediate emotional relief. A person gets rejected and sends a message they later regret. Someone gets criticized and destroys a valuable relationship because they couldn't tolerate being uncomfortable. Someone loses money and makes an even bigger financial mistake because they are desperate to recover quickly. Someone fails once and quits because they interpret the pain of failure as proof that they should stop. In each case, the emotion isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is allowing the emotion to become the decision maker. You are going to feel anger. You are going to feel fear. You are going to feel disappointment. You are going to experience moments where you feel completely overwhelmed. That's part of being human. Resilience doesn't require you to become emotionless. It requires you to become capable of functioning while emotions are present. You can be afraid and still think. You can be angry and still remain disciplined. You can be disappointed and still continue working. You can feel pressure without allowing pressure to dictate your behavior. This is a skill that becomes stronger through practice. You don't develop emotional control by simply reading about it. You develop it by deliberately practicing control during uncomfortable moments. When something annoys you, notice your first reaction instead of automatically acting on it. When somebody criticizes you, listen before defending yourself. When something goes wrong, force yourself to identify the facts before creating a story about what they mean. When your plans change unexpectedly, practice adapting instead of spending all your energy wishing the situation were different. The more you practice this, the faster you become at recovering from emotional disruption. You might still get frustrated, but you recover faster. You might still feel fear, but you don't freeze for as long. You might still experience disappointment, but you don't allow it to destroy your entire day. That recovery speed is one of the most important parts of resilience. Life isn't about avoiding every emotional hit. It's about becoming capable of getting back into a useful state after the hit happens. Consider an athlete who loses an important competition. They can spend days replaying the loss, blaming the referee, blaming the conditions, blaming their opponent, or telling themselves they weren't good enough. Or they can study what happened. Maybe their preparation was weak. Maybe their technique needs improvement. Maybe they made poor decisions under pressure. Maybe they weren't physically ready. The loss doesn't have to become an identity. It can become information. The emotionally controlled person eventually asks, "What can I learn from this?" Because learning creates a path forward while emotional obsession keeps you trapped in the past. This same principle applies to your career, relationships, finances, education, and personal goals. When something fails, don't immediately create a dramatic story around it. Separate facts from interpretations. If someone doesn't respond to you, the fact is that they didn't respond. Everything beyond that may be an assumption. If you don't get the job, the fact is that you weren't selected. That doesn't automatically mean you're worthless. If a business idea doesn't work, the fact is that the strategy didn't produce the result you wanted. That doesn't mean you are incapable of building something else. The mind becomes resilient when you stop adding unnecessary suffering to an already difficult situation. Reality can hurt enough on its own. You don't need to make it worse by constantly replaying the event, predicting disasters, attacking yourself, or imagining what everyone else thinks about you. You need clarity. You need facts. You need the next move, and sometimes the next move is doing nothing until you're calm enough to make a good decision. There is strength in refusing to respond immediately. Not every message deserves an instant answer. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every setback requires a dramatic reaction. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step away, regain control, and return to the problem with a clearer mind. This is especially important when you're under serious pressure. Pressure has a way of making everything feel urgent, but not everything that feels urgent actually is urgent. Your mind may tell you that you must solve everything immediately, but sometimes the smartest decision is to slow down enough to think accurately. A calm mind can see options that a panicked mind completely misses. That's why you should train calmness before you desperately need it. Don't wait until your life falls apart to discover that you don't know how to handle pressure. Practice now. Put yourself in situations that challenge your patience. Have difficult conversations. Take on demanding goals. Learn to continue your responsibilities when you're not motivated. Learn to make decisions without needing everyone to agree with you. Learn to tolerate uncertainty without immediately searching for an escape. Every uncomfortable experience becomes another repetition for your mental strength. Every time you remain calm when you could have reacted, you're building control. Every time you choose a thoughtful response instead of an emotional impulse, you're strengthening the habit. Eventually, staying composed becomes less of an effort and more of a default response. The objective isn't to create a life where nothing goes wrong. That's impossible. The objective is to become someone who doesn't fall apart every time something goes wrong. You want to become the person who can walk into chaos and still think clearly. The person who can receive bad news and immediately start evaluating options. The person who can experience rejection without begging for approval. The person who can lose something valuable without losing themselves. The person who can face uncertainty without becoming paralyzed. Because when you can control your response under pressure, circumstances lose some of their power over you. Problems may still hurt. Setbacks may still matter. Difficult situations may still demand sacrifice, but you are no longer adding panic to the problem. You are no longer allowing temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. You are training yourself to become the person who looks at difficulty directly, takes a breath, gathers the facts, and starts searching for the next move. A resilient mind understands that failure is not always a verdict. Sometimes it is feedback. Sometimes it is a warning. Sometimes it is simply evidence that a particular strategy didn't work. You attempted something, the result wasn't what you wanted, and now you have information that you didn't have before. That information can become extremely valuable if you're willing to study it instead of running away from it. The question isn't whether you will fail. At some point, you will. Everyone does. The more important question is what you do with the failure after it happens. Think about someone learning to drive for the first time. They don't expect perfection immediately. They make mistakes with timing, positioning, braking, and judgment. They receive feedback and improve. Nobody reasonably expects them to become an expert after one attempt. Yet when it comes to other areas of life, people often expect themselves to succeed immediately. They start a business and expect it to work. They begin learning a skill and expect rapid results. They enter a relationship and expect everything to go perfectly. Then reality introduces difficulty, and they interpret the difficulty as proof that they should stop. But difficulty is often part of the learning process. If you make a mistake, investigate it. What happened? What decision led to it? What did you misunderstand? What did you fail to prepare for? What skill was missing? What assumption turned out to be wrong? What would you do differently if you could restart the situation? These questions transform failure from something emotionally destructive into something practically useful. Imagine you apply for 10 opportunities and get rejected every time. The weak response is to say, "Nobody wants me." The stronger response is to investigate the pattern. Is your presentation weak? Are you applying for the wrong opportunities? Is your skill level insufficient? Is your communication unclear? Are you failing to demonstrate your value? Maybe you discover that your approach needs improvement. Now the rejection has given you information. You haven't wasted the experience because you can use that information to change your strategy. This is what separates people who grow from people who repeat the same mistakes. Some people experience failure but learn nothing because they're too emotionally invested in defending themselves. They want to prove that the failure wasn't their fault. They blame circumstances. They blame other people. They blame timing. They blame luck. Sometimes those things genuinely do play a role, but if you focus entirely on external explanations, you can miss the most important question. What can I control? You don't need to blame yourself for everything. That's not resilience either. Resilience means taking responsibility for the part you can influence. Maybe you couldn't control another person's decision, but you can control how you communicate next time. Maybe you couldn't control the market, but you can control how well you research your next opportunity. Maybe you couldn't control the rejection, but you can control whether you improve the skill that contributed to the rejection. This is where failure becomes a teacher, and the more you learn from failure, the less frightening failure becomes. You stop seeing every mistake as a catastrophe because you've experienced setbacks before and discovered that they didn't destroy you. You know that you can recover. You know that you can adjust. You know that you can learn. You know that one bad outcome doesn't automatically determine the next outcome. That creates a different kind of confidence. It's not the confidence of someone who believes nothing will go wrong. It's the confidence of someone who knows they can respond when something does go wrong. That's a much stronger foundation. Your identity should never depend entirely on your latest result. If you win, you don't become a superior human being. If you lose, you don't become worthless. Results matter because they provide feedback, but they are not the complete definition of who you are. You are the person capable of learning from the result. This distinction is critical because people often protect their ego by avoiding difficult situations. If failure means humiliation, they won't try. If rejection means they're worthless, they'll never ask. If criticism means they're inadequate, they'll avoid anyone who might challenge them. Eventually, they create a comfortable life that protects them from failure, but also protects them from growth. You cannot become resilient while constantly avoiding anything that could hurt your ego at some point. You have to become comfortable being a beginner. You have to be willing to look inexperienced. You have to be willing to make mistakes publicly. You have to be willing to hear that your first attempt isn't good enough. You have to be willing to change your strategy when evidence tells you that your current approach isn't working. That requires humility. You don't need to defend every decision you've ever made. You don't need to pretend you were right when the evidence says you were wrong. You don't need to protect an outdated version of yourself just because you spent time building it. If something isn't working, change it. If a habit is hurting you, replace it. If a strategy keeps producing poor results, examine it. If your understanding was wrong, learn the correct information. Being able to say, I was wrong, and now I know better, is not weakness. It is one of the clearest signs that your mind is becoming more resilient. And don't underestimate small failures. You don't need to wait for some enormous crisis to develop this mindset. Everyday life gives you opportunities to practice. You miss a deadline, learn from it. You make a poor decision, study it. You lose your temper, examine what triggered it. You waste time, identify why. You set a goal and don't follow through. Investigate what caused the breakdown. The objective isn't to attack yourself. The objective is to become curious about your own behavior. Ask yourself, what happened here? Then ask, what can I change? Then act on the answer. That process gradually creates a person who is difficult to defeat because every setback contributes to their knowledge. Instead of becoming weaker after every mistake, they become more informed. Instead of repeating the same pattern, they recognize it earlier. Instead of being surprised by the same obstacle again and again, they prepare for it. This is how resilience compounds. One failure teaches you something. The next challenge gives you another lesson. Eventually, you have accumulated enough experience that situations that once terrified you become manageable. Not because life became easier, but because you became more capable. And that is the mindset you need to build. Don't worship success and don't fear failure. Study both. Success can teach you what works, while failure can expose what needs to change. Treat both as information. Keep your identity separate from the outcome. Let your mistakes educate you instead of defining you, and let every setback become another piece of knowledge that strengthens the person you are becoming. At the end of the day, building a resourceful and resilient mindset isn't about creating a life where nothing ever goes wrong. That's impossible. Life will test you. Plans will fail. People will disappoint you. Opportunities will disappear. You will experience rejection, uncertainty, pressure, and moments when you don't have the resources you wish you had. The difference is what you become when those moments arrive. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Learn to use what you already have. Instead of focusing on everything that is missing, start looking for the next move. Instead of allowing pressure to control your emotions, train yourself to stay calm enough to think clearly. And when failure arrives, don't turn one bad result into an identity. Study it, learn from it, adjust your strategy, and keep moving. You don't need to become someone who never struggles. You need to become someone who knows how to respond when struggle appears. That's where real strength is developed. Every difficult situation gives you another opportunity to practice discipline, patience, adaptability, courage, and problem solving. Every setback can either become an excuse to stop or another lesson that makes you harder to break. Remember this: you cannot always control what happens to you, but you can work on controlling what you do next. You may not choose the obstacle, but you can choose your response. You may not control the setback, but you can decide whether it teaches you or defeats you. You may not have everything you want today, but you can learn to maximize what you have today. The strongest mindset isn't the one that says nothing will ever go wrong. It's the one that says, whatever happens, I will find a way to respond. That is resourcefulness, that is resilience, and that is the mindset that allows you to keep moving when circumstances give you every reason to stop.